Welcome to My Favourite Beatles Song, the podcast where we celebrate the music of the Beatles with a distinguished guest. My name's Tim Tucker, and today I'll be speaking with Neil Crossley. Neil is a freelance editor and writer specialising in music, TV and technology. His work has appeared in publications such as The Guardian, The Independent, The Financial Times and The Times. But Neil is also a singer-songwriter with the band Furlined and was a member of International Blue, a Scott Walker-influenced pop croon project album produced by Tony Visconti. Welcome, Neil.
Hi, Tim.
How are you doing?
Yeah, all right, thanks, yeah.
Where would you rate your level of Beatle fandom from 0 to 10?
Difficult. In terms of feel, probably you can't sort of create two different charts. But in terms of overall love and feel, I would say 8. In terms of my fandom, in terms of trivia, I would probably say about 6. So you can just either go for one of those.
I think 8's the better one, yeah. In terms of, how you appreciate their music.
Yeah, and it's the feel for me. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever had, Neil, any contact with the Beatles or their organisation? Any stories around that?
The only thing which is pretty tenuous, well, it's not that tenuous, is I co-wrote a song that was covered by Julian Lennon back in 2014. I was involved in a project called International Blue. And it was Tony Visconti was producing it. A Dutch composer called Stephen Emmer was essentially writing the tracks and then sending 4 baritones. And it was myself, Glenn Gregory from Heaven 17, Liam McCahey from Cousteau, and a late addition was Midjure. So he would send us the tracks with the top line melody and say, could you write lyrics and can you then sing the track? So I wrote the lyrics and I went and recorded it in Bristol, and I got pinged over to New York. And so I wrote a track called Sleep for England, which was all about my mum, because my mum wasn't very well at the time. And I remember being up north and saying to her one morning, "How do you feel?" And she said, "Oh, I could sleep for England." And I'd just been sent this track a few days before, hadn't got any ideas. And it was just one of those phrases I thought, oh, well, that won't work, will it? And quite often, as you know, these things can work. So it just all came together really from that.
She pulls herself out from the bedclothes and she opens the curtains wide, stares down to the valley where the healthy and the happy flow by.
So we did that. We showcased the album at Abbey Road, and then about it was going to BMG were going to run with it and take it, and Cobalt were going to do it, and in the end nothing happened, which was a shame because it was a really good album in the end. But about 6 months later, I got a call from the press guy who was doing it, saying that they wanted Julian Lennon to cover it. The deal was that we were going to do all proceeds for the White Feather Foundation, which was apparently he set it up. When his father was alive, when John Lennon was alive, they apparently had a conversation at one point, and John Lennon said, look, if I die, if there's any way of sending a sign to you, it will be in the form of a white feather. And Julian Lennon, I think, the years went on after his father died, and then he happened to be, he was touring Australia, nothing to do with music, I don't think, and he met this Aborigine chief. And the first thing this Aborigine chief did to him was give him this white feather. And he just said, shivers just went up his spine, And so he then, I think with his mother, Cynthia, as well, they set up something called the White Feather Foundation, which is a sort of humanitarian and environmental, I don't know, it's a charity, but I don't know the exact role, but it does good, basically. And so he covered it as a Christmas single. And it was very weird to hear, because at the time, oh God, he's bound to change some of the words. And he didn't change any words. And it's very weird to hear something that you've written in your mum's kitchen being sung by someone else, And then they did a video for it, which sort of reflected the theme of the song and sort of being elderly and sort of, looking back on your life and that kind of thing. And so that was it, really. I never really heard from Julian Lennon about it.
Did you like his version?
No, I mean, I thought Julian's version was fine. I just don't think it it didn't change it particularly in any way for me, apart from the fact it was Julian Lennon singing it, and so it had a new life, you know.
He does sound quite a lot like his father, doesn't he, when he sings?
Does, yeah. I mean, I'm pleased that it happens, and occasionally, I mean, you know, even just before we met now, I listened to his version, and you do sort of think, well, it's quite incredible, really. I mean, obviously, I'm a sort of John Lennon fan specifically, but there is that link.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm glad that I've done it, and I'm glad that he recorded it as well.
As part of your journalism, you produced Beatles specials. Is that right?
I did, yeah. I got asked by a company called Anthem Publishing in Bath to edit 4 issues, basically split into like 2-year periods. So going through four sections of the Beatles' sort of career, really.
Yeah.
And it's funny. The whole Beatles thing is amusing in a way because as I may have said before, by the time I was 16, I kind of knew everything I felt I ever needed to know about the Beatles, you know. Particularly in terms of trivia.
Yeah.
But but the minute you get back into it and you learn all this other stuff, you know, and some of it is quite witty. Some of it, there's like one where they're driving up to some Doncaster or somewhere and they've got all the guitars strapped to the roof and one of them falls off, you know, and it's a Gretsch and it's just smashed by this lorry or something. And they're all stood in the road watching this lorry disappear down the road, you know. And so there's all those things, but yeah, I enjoyed it, and it gave me, you know, I mean, obviously you're editing, so your main thing is you're looking at that, but I don't think it really altered my perception of the Beatles in any way. But it just broadened the context of it out a little bit, I think. I did something last year, which was I got asked to do by a magazine, which was it was just a history of the Cavern, really, you know, from the beat, and so I ended up interviewing someone who's terrible, Debbie Goldberg, someone like that, whose father actually owned the Cavern from 65, you know, and she knew McCartney really well, and that was quite an in. It gave you real, because I didn't realise that when the Cavern first opened, it was opened by a guy who'd been to Paris, so it was a real beatnik kind of jazz venue, you know, and lots of people looking studious and wearing black polo necks, black turtlenecks, that kind of thing, and smoking gouards, you know. But then the one thing that really stuck with me, I said, you know, what can you remember about, you know, the sounds and the feelings? She said, I will always remember the smell. It was just awful, you know, the bad drains, you know, yeah. And it was just, and that, she said, because, you know, the condensation just dripped down on people. It dripped down on the band, and you can just imagine it, you know. And she said, when she'd get the bus into town in her lunchtime from school, her and her friends, they go to one of the Beatles sessions. And they get back on the bus, and she said they would hear people holding their noses going, they've been to the Cavern, that kind of thing, you know. She said, you just stunk when you came out of there, you know. But,
So the track you've chosen today is Paperback Writer, which was the Beatles' 12th single, released on Friday the 10th of June 1966 in the UK and May the 30th in the US, with Rain as its B-side. It went into the charts in the UK at number 2, kept off by Strangers in the Night by Frank Sinatra, but then soon reached number 1. The song itself is credited to Lennon and McCartney, although it's largely considered a McCartney composition. John Lennon said in 1972, Paul wrote this. I think I might have helped with some of the lyrics, but it was mainly Paul's tune. The Beatles recorded the song in April 1966 as part of the sessions for the Revolver album, and it was released before the album came out in August. So why did you choose Paperback Writer as your favourite Beatles song?
It's more about the sound than the actual song. You know, if I went on composition, particularly McCartney, I would go for another song. I'd go for something like She's Leaving Home or something like that. But it's just the sound of it. And it just, whenever I've heard it over the years, whether it's on the tiniest transistor radio as a kid or in a car radio, it always sounds fantastic whenever you hear it. And it's exhilarating, and it's got such energy and joie de vivre, really, and it just drives forward. So it's more the sound and that whole era as well, where they're coming out, they're heading into sort of what became psychedelia. Their look is changing. You see the photographs around that time they're in the studio. They have like tinted glasses on. Everything's loosening up. Everything's moving forward, and it just has that real feel of a forward-thinking song. So it piles forward, and I just think it's a fantastic sound.
As you say, this driving guitar riff, and a host of kind of odd sounds around it, isn't there? Buried in the sort of production.
As I'm sure you know, I mean, one of the key factors is a guy called Jeff Emmerich, who was a young recording engineer. And I think he, when George Martin appointed him as the Beatles engineer, I think it put a few noses out of joint at Abbey Road, because there were people who'd been there for decades, and this young upstart suddenly got the job. But I think one of the reasons it sounds so good is, I heard that the Beatles, when they were over in the States, they really, really wanted to record at Stax, because they loved the sound, or Motown. But someone said Stax were asking for too much money. I can't imagine that was an issue. That can't be right. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. So what happened? The Beatles were very keen. They were saying to Emmerich, look, we want this sound. They were taking in Motown songs and saying, we want, James Jamerson, that kind of thing. And so what he started doing, he just started to experiment with the sound. And so the thing at Abbey Road, it was so regimented in those days. They all walked around with lab coats on. They had these documents that were like guides. You were never allowed to place a microphone more than less than 18 inches from a speaker, that kind of thing. And Emmerich, just with McCartney thrusting him on, just completely changed all that. I mean, he had these large Neumann U47 condenser tube mics, and he was shoving them right into the speaker. And he also, when he was recording the bass for Paperback Writer, which is part of its great sound, he was actually using another speaker as a microphone. There are two things that really shocked me when I started looking more into this track. The first one is it's only about 2.5 minutes long. It's 2 minutes 18, and I couldn't believe it. I thought I was seeing it wrong, that you could pack all that in, And the other thing was, it's McCartney who plays the guitar riff. It's not George Harrison.
Yeah. And
Harrison plays the guide bass. And then, of course, one of the things that makes it great is that McCartney then goes back in with a Rickenbacker bass to record the bass on top. And just do all this amazing stuff, like those sort of twiddle things that he does at the top.
Oh, yeah, beautiful, yeah.
Because I think this track, when they recorded it, was the start of what became the Revolver Sessions, and they needed a single. They got this one in the bag, and out it went. But this is the one where they were first experimenting with those things, and I know they did the same on Ringo's drum kit, because Ringo came in one day and he heard it, and he said, "What have you done with my drums? It sounds fantastic," But he wasn't suspended, but he got a written warning. A microphone abuse. It's like John McEnroe.
Yes. Classic, isn't it?
I don't actually remember hearing it as a kid when it came out, because I was a bit too young for that. But I do remember hearing it early 70s. It would pop on occasionally, and and it really does. And I think that's a testament to the engineering and the production as much as anything, that it can sound that good.
Perhaps it's because those were innovations at the time. They've become refined since, haven't they, through digital, especially now with digital equipment. But back then they were making use of quite primitive equipment to make this stuff up, including things like ADT, is artificial or automatic double tracking, which Ken Townsend, another engineer on the project, invented. That's where you take a copy of the lead vocal or whatever vocal and then put it slightly delayed so it sounds like thicker. And again, we can do that digitally now, but that was done through tape and stuff, which is crazy. There's that sound which always leaps out to me, I don't know if you find this, of when they sing that Paperback, and it's like a little sort of echo with a phaser on it, which is apparently something called Steed.
Well, I read that on the recording, before they put that on, there was this really uncomfortable silence at that point on the track, and so no one's really completely found out whether they meant to do it like that and then add the echo, or whether they thought, oh my God, we're going to have to fill that gap with something. The other thing that I should mention that I love about the sound of the track is that first beat of the kick drum, the first beat after the riff. It's almost like a pushed beat, and they all and the bass and the drum, and it's that. It's just, and I went online. I was looking last night, and I suddenly thought, I wonder if Beatles ever played it live. And there's this awful version of them doing it at the Budokan in Tokyo, and then there's a version of McCartney doing it. And the interesting thing is that while he's got this great drummer in his band at the moment, the guy just, in my head, just doesn't nail it on the drums. He doesn't get that push. Not the whole band don't either. The same way the actual Beatles had it.
Ringo is such an underrated drummer, don't you think?
Oh God, I mean, and his drumming and his drums are fantastic on that song. They really are. Yeah.
They dampened his drums by putting a sweater in, and again, this hadn't been done before. Amazingly. I love the story of them writing it, because back in those days they did spend time together writing, even then in mid-66, and he was driving to Lennon's estate and he got the phrase paperback writer in his head, and he thought it sounds like that could work. And apparently he says, it's classic McCartney anecdote, he says his aunt had told him, you write all the time about love, why don't you try writing about something else? And then when he got there, he said we worked on it. But it sounds like McCartney was pretty much responsible for all of it.
I think so, yeah. And I remember hearing about the Auntie Evie, or whatever she was called. It's quite a nice image. Whenever they met, she's obviously berating him for not writing songs properly. But yeah, I think they did. They wrote it at Kenwood, didn't they? Which is John Lennon's place, and of course it references the Daily Mail. And I'm always intrigued that the Beatles would even get the Daily Mail. They'd be sat there with the Daily Mail, but I think the Daily Mail comes up somewhere else in one of those songs or something. But anyway, the Daily Mail is lying around. And I suppose one other thing that hit me when I listened to it again was the fact that the composition-wise, it doesn't really evolve in any way. It's kind of stop, start, riff, first, chorus. But the thing that moves it forward as well is the narrative, of course. Because and I think McCartney felt pretty pleased with himself, because up to that point, they still were writing songs about love. They were doing things like Norwegian Wood, but I think he thought that to write that sort of third-person narrative, I think what I've read is they felt it was more like Dylan would do, that kind of thing.
I'm trying to think of songs that the Beatles had done before this that weren't about. The only one I can think of is Nowhere Man from Rubber Soul.
Yeah, Nowhere Man's the obvious one. Yeah.
But they were pretty much all love songs, or at least relationship songs, weren't they? Apart from that, and this is his first big kind of narrative, isn't it, for McCartney, certainly, where
definitely
it goes on to be something of a thing for McCartney, not just with the Beatles but on into his own solo career. He's really good at that storytelling, I think, song. But yeah, this is certainly his first.
There are some nice lines in it. Yeah, I mean, a dirty story of a dirty man his clinging wife doesn't understand. I mean, it's a little bit flippant, but it's nice. I mean, I always kind of smirk a bit with Paul, because I always imagine him at school, because he seems like the person would have all his pencils sharpened, while Lennon had a lot of drive, I think Lennon, possibly by his own admission, was a bit lazy at times, and they would all prefer to stay in bed. And then, of course, when Epstein had died and they were having to go to the studio, it was McCartney who was getting up. And I mean, again, as you can see with this song, he was going into the studio after hours with Jeff Emmerich when everyone had gone home, like taking control of the song and making it his baby, really,
In fact, this is the turning point year, I think. Do you? Because if you think about it, up till then, Leonard had definitely been the leader of the Beatles. He pretty much wrote the majority of the. I mean, they wrote together, but if you look at Hard Day's Night, for example, most of those songs are John Lennon's songs, and Paul's contributions were good. I mean, he had the odd massive contribution like Yesterday and All My Loving, but he wasn't quite rocking as much as Lennon, I don't think, until this year when he had some great tunes on Revolver. He had these singles, and then of course Sgt. Pepper and onwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, creatively, absolutely, creatively and sort of physically, actually physically putting in the hours,
Yeah, yeah. He's a restless creative, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think, was it the case that they were all sort of married apart from him at this point or something?
Yes.
Or that they all had, I think he was with Jane Asher and that had broken up. I'm not sure when that happened. So it could be possible that he was sort of single at the time. So maybe he had, I don't know, maybe he just had physically have more time on his hands.
It could be that, couldn't it? Yeah, he's even today. I mean, we speak at a time when he's released his third solo album, which he played with during lockdown. That's classic Paul, isn't it? He's just always wanted to be recording and writing. I also, while we're on the lyrics, interesting that it should start as a letter, don't you think? Dear Sir or Madam. So it's basically the song is a letter.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I was thinking about that last night, actually. It is. It's a lovely intro, yeah.
Dear Sir or Madam, read my book. It took me years to write. Will you take a look? It's based on a novel by a man named Lear, and I need a job, so I want to be a paperback writer. Paperback writer.
The book Beatles 66 by Steve Turner makes the point that, as well as kind of all that hippie spirituality of Ginsberg and Leary and so on, this was also the time of things like Bond and David Bailey and the Avengers and Playboy. It was coincidentally, it was the same month that Time magazine ran the famous cover story of London, Swinging City. So this is right in the middle of that, when London becomes swinging 60s. Do you know what I mean? It sort of sets the style for the world.
No, definitely. I mean, there is that spirit of optimism of something happening or something about to happen. And just going back to what you were saying about sort of, focusing on the physical on his lyrics. So there is, there is these little bits of sort of reality trivia, like the Daily Mail and little things that he sees about, I guess not a lot of people were doing that. I mean, Dylan was doing it, but, there's not a lot in that one. I think he obviously had more in as he came on. And of course, he references Lear in there as well, which I know you spoke about on a previous podcast.
He was clearly an influence, wasn't he? Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It is the everyday. Whenever John goes into that kind of spiritual, kind of Strawberry Fields type area, or on this single, it's Rain, isn't it? Where he goes into the spiritual, it's all in your head, man. Paul's quite often down to earth about the everyday suburbia or London streets and Daily Mail, isn't he? Yes.
I mean, I guess another person who was doing it at the same time would be someone like Ray Davies, I guess.
This was a great year for music, wasn't it? We had the Kinks with a dedicated follower of fashion. Has that kind of feel, doesn't it?
I often wonder what Paul McCartney and John Lennon thought of the Kinks. It's probably referenced somewhere, but I've never bothered to look it up.
There's a few stories. One is that, I don't know if you've heard that song. It's not one of their most famous now, but See My Friends. Yeah. Which sounds like, it hasn't got a sitar on it, but it sounds like it has. It sounds quite Indian. And it predates, it's the only thing that predates the Beatles' Indian stuff.
It does. It also almost sounds a bit like Rain, actually.
Yes,
yeah.
See my friends, see my friends, they across the river. See my friends, see my friends, they across the river.
No, it does have a sort of aspirational thing to it, doesn't it? You're right. And like you said, there's all these figures at the time, like Vidal Sassoon, David Bailey, Karen Stamp, people who just, but not, people, not who just sort of pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, but just have that innate confidence in the same way that the Beatles. I'm still astonished about that first press conference when the Beatles go to America and how confident they are. They're not fazed. And people sort of say, oh, they all have that natural humour. I always think Paul was a little bit more guarded than the rest. If you look back at those, whenever anyone says anything slightly cheeky, you can see him looking a bit nervous until he sees the reaction of the press, and then he starts smiling, But the confidence that they had was phenomenal.
Could you please sing something?
No! Sorry.
Next question. If you can sing.
No, we need money first.
What do you think of the comment that you're nothing but a bunch of British Elvis Presley?
Oh, it's not true. It's not true.
What your music does to these people?
I don't know. It pleases them, I think. Well, they must do because they're buying it.
Why does it excite them so much?
We don't know, really. If we knew, we'd form another group and be managers.
In terms of the songwriter, you're a songwriter. This is really sparse, isn't it? Almost a one-chord song. If you look at the chord sheet, it's G7 with the occasional stray into C.
I mean, it's like half a 12 bar. It kind of goes G, C, then there's an A minor in there somewhere. But bearing in mind what we know about McCartney and his, he's fond of minors and minor sevenths and that kind of thing. It's surprising for him to write such what is essentially a basic song. Like you say, it's maybe just G and C really, and that's kind of it really.
I wonder if there was a deliberate attempt, because there's a quote from McCartney before this, when I think this was when they were working. Yeah, it was when they were working on Rubber Soul, and he said to write a really good song with just one note in it, something like Long Tall Sally, is really very hard.
Right. Okay.
Now, I know this hasn't got one note in it, but it's that sort of thing, isn't it? He said at the time, it's the kind of thing we've wanted to do for some time. We get near it in the word.
I suspect that was informing his decision. If that was, that was a relatively recent thought that he'd had, it's obviously on his mind to basically, to cut back and, try and be creative by, the whole less is more approach kind of thing.
Because it opens with the lovely harmonies, another sort of structural innovation in a way. I mean, it'd been done before, but they don't open with an intro. They open with a B section, don't they? Paperback. Yeah. And that's a really interesting blending of voices, isn't it? I know you work with other singers in harmony. Were you impressed with the harmonies on this one?
Yeah, I was. Although in a way, because it's the Beatles, I just almost took it for granted, really, because I've heard the song so much. I mean, I do know, just reading about this, that obviously, as has been well documented, they were very influenced by the Beach Boys. And I think the track Sloop John B has been mentioned in context for this. Aside from all the techniques and technology that they used on them, you can't get away from the fact that in a way like siblings have, their voices fit together, that sonically the timbre of their voices just works so well together, because it's not always the case, is it? Quite often it's not quite right.
I think George Martin might have been instrumental in actually arranging the intro harmonies, because they are quite strange the way they go across each other. You end up in the third and fourth bars with a B note and a C note being sung at the same time.
Yeah, which shouldn't work.
Paperback writer.
Did you realise they were singing Frere Jacques in the background vocals?
On Paperback Writer?
Yeah. So
I read that and I couldn't see where it was, so I just swiftly moved on in my head.
If you listen to the third and fourth verses, they come in, you can really clearly hear, especially in the stereo versions, which most of them are. Okay. You can hear in your right ear, you can hear Frere Jacques from John.
Okay.
It's 1,000 pages, give or take a few. I'll be writing more in a week or two. I could make it longer if you like to start. I can change it round, and I want to be a paperback writer.
But there was also the whole Yardbirds and blues things coming on, and the guitar riff, John Lennon claimed, was a nod to that kind of side of music, which was that heavier sound, which was just coming of what became the early roots of rock, really, wasn't it? Where you had like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, people like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, Lennon said in an interview in 1980, he said, Paperback Writer is the son of Day Tripper, meaning a rock and roll song with a guitar lick on a fuzzy, loud guitar.
Right, okay. I do know that Lennon told someone that, Paperback Writer, at the time, this is our new single, it's not actually very good. It's not the best one that we've done, which is quite revealing, really. But
he doesn't seem to have rated it highly. But
no.
He wrote Day Tripper, so maybe he was trying to imply there that Paul had kind of ripped off Day Tripper for his next single. I don't know, but
good point. Because I do know, it's interesting that he did that guitar riff for Paperback Writer, because it is very George Harrison, and in a way, because a lot of George Harrison's riffs were like reinverted riffs from old rock and roll songs.
Yeah,
I feel fine with watch this step, watch your step, and stuff like this. And so he did a very good job of it.
It's so much heavier though, the Paperback Writer riff, isn't it? If you listen to the riff on Day Tripper, which I think is a better riff actually, but melodically. But it's quite straight. It's quite a thin, straight sound. Whereas the guitar sound on Paperback Writer is really kind of raucous. It's the first fuzz sound they've used, I think.
Well, I do know, again, with the whole microphone thing at Abbey Road, any requests for compression or fuzz were just met with absolute refusal by the engineers at Abbey Road. It was just everything they were trying to avoid in their heads. So they did not want anything to have overdrive on it in any, it stayed in the black kind of thing, So you have to like break the rules to get the good stuff,
Yeah, I read that it was this song that influenced the Monkees to write their first single.
Oh, wow. Right, okay.
But yeah, the Monkees' debut single, Last Train to Clarksville, was written by Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, was directly inspired by hearing Paperback Writer on the radio. Boyce heard the end of the song and thought Paul was singing Take the Last Train rather than Paperback Writer. So they used similar chord structures, the harmonies and guitars to try and match that feel. So
I mean, that's a good enough reason for a title as anything, I think. If you heard something that isn't even there, just take it and run with it.
Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30 cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow. No.
You're not alone in favouring this one. Ed Harcourt.
Oh, I like Ed Harcourt.
He says, one of the best songs Paul wrote, Paperback Writer, at his total peak, I reckon. I love the fact that he made a real effort to write a song that wasn't about love because his aunt apparently asked him to. I find George's guitar licks quite difficult to play. He obviously didn't know that it was Paul.
No.
But then I'm not really a proper guitar player. These particular recordings, given what they were recorded on at the time, still feel so much more original than most pop music today in arrangement and sound. Another person who said it was one of their favourite songs, and intriguingly we don't have his reasoning, but is Frank Zappa. He famously knocked the Beatles a lot, and I think it was his third album with the Mothers of Invention was called We're Only In It For The Money and had a big pastiche of Sgt. Pepper's on the cover. It was pretty clear where he was coming from, but he did say in an interview, I like their music. He said I like 3 songs: Paperback Writer, Strawberry Fields, and I Am the Walrus.
My goodness.
But unfortunately, we never got his reasoning.
I Am the Walrus, completely get that with Frank Zappa. Strawberry Fields probably, but Paperback Writer, you just would not. You would have thought it was far too safe a song for him to be interested in.
I managed to dig out a sound check where Zappa is taking his band through Paperback Writer to perform at a concert. And it seems like he's really enjoying the riff. He's enjoying explaining the riff. He's enjoying explaining the harmonies at the beginning and through the song. And he's even got the horn sections doing that harmony as well. So I think he saw those elements that we talked about, which was, the driving riff, the harmonies, seeing it all work together. He seems to be enjoying getting that out of his band.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
The group that asked the question, who the fuck are the Beatles? Someone's gonna start with me. What key is it? Let's start. 3, 2, 1.
Saxon did a cover. You know Saxon?
Really?
Who were at the vanguard of new British heavy metal, weren't they?
They used to play in a local pub when I was growing up. They were called Son of a Bitch back then, and they used to come over the Pennines from Yorkshire and descend on this place and take the place apart. They were very good at what they did.
I mean, there's a very straight cover, a straight rendition, but it does work as a heavy metal song.
But you imagine it would be straight, just but even more fuzz on it.
I'll be writing more in a week or two. I can make it longer if you like the style. I can change it around, but I wanna be a paperback writer.
Oh, one other little thing. Mick Jagger was in the studio when they recorded Paperback Writer. Didn't know if you knew that.
Well, George Harrison said years ago, quite sardonically, Mick was always hanging around, seeing what he could filch idea-wise, or something like that. He didn't actually say that, but you got the feeling that Mick was always really worried about what the Beatles were up to because he was so bloody competitive, And I mean, I'm sort of with you in many ways about the Stones, because you compare them all. I mean, there's a lot of albums that I love, like Let It Be, but the big problem I have, I don't really like Jagger's voice, and I know I'm not alone. I don't think it's a great voice.
Right.
He's clearly a great performer.
Oh, I wouldn't deny that, yeah.
And he's clearly very smart, and he's the reason, someone once said, he's the reason that Keith Richards didn't end up in a band like swinging blue jeans, you know, that were
Yeah.
just lost. You know, it's because of Mick Jagger. He had the drive and the intelligence to kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, the Beatles. I mean, you know, I mean, take the Beatles and Bowie over the Stones anytime. You know.
So Neil, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Can you tell us how listeners can find out more about what you do, whether it's your band or your writing?
It's furlined.co.uk. And we're on Bandcamp, and I can't remember the exact URL of the Bandcamp.
If you send it to me, I'll drop it in the show notes, so when it'll show up when people are listening. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Well,
Okay.
Thanks so much, Neil, for taking part.
Thank you, Tim. I've enjoyed it.
That was great. Thanks for listening to My Favourite Beatles Song. I'll be publishing new episodes every 2 weeks, so please subscribe through your favourite podcast provider to get episodes as they're released. If you like the podcast, please leave a review or rating, as this helps us to reach new listeners. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at My Favourite Beatles Song and Twitter at My Fave Beatles. See you next time.